Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who, when this is done, is going to gift me a tanning bed, and I'm going to live in it.
Tim Longo.
That's really just because I never go outside because my boss works me too hard that I need the tanning bed.
But right. No.
That old chestnut, as someone says.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I remember that line too. I don't think it would work. I get the concept, but
of course, if the power is going to flicker off and on, the light's not going to work too well.
I just think that the darkness will because the tanning. Well, I guess
tanning bed is just lights. I mean, that's all it is.
But I mean, isn't it enclosed? Like you're not. It's not open.
It's so not open, but you're lit inside.
You're inside light, so I think the darkness can just pick up the whole thing and throw you through the air.
Of course.
And they never see the darkness will never see the light. So I just think Barry's hasn't thought that through.
Probably not. I don't think Barry's thinks a lot of things through.
He's like Christmas lights around his.
I mean,
that's a great
moment.
It's a great character moment. Yeah,
we are of course talking about Alan Wake. Just want to go ahead and put that. If not following this conversation, we're talking about basically the end of chapter 4. I guess right? Is all the city stuff is in chapter 4? Oh no, it's at the beginning of episode 5, which is really a long episode.
I really, to be honest, I couldn't distinguish them if you asked me to. Like, it all bleeds together for me.
4 is the farm with the battle on the stage, and then they make it to the farmhouse. They get drunk. He has his vision because he drinks the moonshine. He has a vision. He basically reclaims his memories, and then they escape down the mountainside to
they go to jail.
Town.
Well.
They get jailed, yeah. Oh, that's right. They get jailed because the guy shows up there, the FBI agent, who is very underwritten in terms of who the heck he is, right? Because
he talks about him in the pages quite a bit, but you don't get to see him very much. It's pretty. I feel like they cut some scenes with him or something because he's pretty.
Yeah. He basically shows up to chase you out of the. Chase you into the woods again, because the woods is where the game is at its scariest, especially when you're just trying to find landmarks, and like we talked about last time, that's when it's most effective for me is when you're in the woods, and then at any point one of the a couple of those dudes might show up, and now they're going to be behind trees, and and that can be pretty creepy, and just being in the environment works for me, audio wise especially. So
I like the sequence where you're going through the town though too.
Yeah.
Which was just mainly it was just I think because it was a nice change of pace from the forest.
Yeah.
Because you're meeting them in houses and there was more tension in that kind of Silent Hill 2 kind of way where you're going through a town and you're not meeting that many of them, so you're never sure. It's that whole tension, right? Where they're out of context, right? You see them in the diner, and but anyway, I agree. It's the when it comes to the scary parts, the forest is the best. Is the bread and butter.
So that's basically chapter 5 is basically the town, and then making your way to the dam, and ending up in the well lit room, which as a location name is very Control.
It was totally. I felt like. It's got to be in Control someplace. It's got to. They must mention it someplace because it's
they probably do. I think there's a spec script or something for Night Springs in Control as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's awesome. I know that there are ties. I don't know which because I played it as one thing. I don't know what is DLC and what was just kind of there, as a nod to the other games that they've made. But I think that there's probably some Quantum Break as well. But I since I don't know that one, I didn't
Quantum Jump.
Quantum Leap.
Nice. Quantum Jump. Woof. Wow. Yeah.
Yep. It's only Tuesday, folks.
Can't even retain that.
I never really watched that show, so
only a little bit, but Yeah, because the Control DLC was the Foundation thing, which I haven't played them, and then there was the Alan Wake one on the Foundation. There was only two, right? But you're saying they might have peppered in other.
I'm saying there might be stuff from Quantum Break that's in Control that I'm not aware of.
Oh yeah.
Because I haven't played Quantum Break, so I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, but let's. I mean, we've got some systemic stuff still to talk about in greater depth. The 3Cs, especially, I think is something you want to pick apart. But we might as well, tie that into some mechanical stuff we talk about later. Let's talk about some of these story elements. I had forgotten, and I hadn't gotten to this point last week when we recorded the part where he basically recovers the memory of what had happened and fills in the blank for that week. What happened that week? And that's really critical, to understanding what the story is meant to do. And I want to actually go just before that to the battle of on the bandstand. I just love that. I don't know if you hung out with Thor and Odin very long at the at the clinic. Mm-hmm. But they keep talking. There's a point where they're just kind of sitting there, and one of them's got his hammer, Mjolnir, which is just like a little squeaky hammer that he's just like tapping on the table. They're like doing a puzzle or playing chess or something. And then at a certain point, they just lapse into this story of being, basically stories of being gods, right? And I don't know if we're meant to assume that they are actually gods, but they do. Odin talks about, what is it, hugging and mugging, or whatever his crows. He's got the eye patch and all of that stuff. And then at a certain point, they just kind of drift off and are a couple of senile old men again. But that's when you learn you're up against Baba Yaga. So it's like, what is going? Like, I thought this was in the Pacific Northwest. That's not really a Pacific Northwest thing.
Oh, I didn't. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned that in pre-show. And I thought you were joking. I didn't.
No, they literally say that. They invoke Baba Yaga.
You mean the two old guys?
The two old guys do, yeah.
Yeah, or maybe that's just their interpretation of, because Baba Yaga is used as a analogous in a lot of different cultures.
Right, but her name is Barbara Jagger.
Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. Well, yeah, I guess it is a little on the nose then.
Yeah. Yeah.
I never put that. I didn't hear them say that, and I didn't.
Okay, put the two and two you have together. To wait around. It was where I had saved, and between last week and this week, finishing it. And so when I came back to it, I actually was just finishing my lunch. I was just like loading it up and getting it going, and I was just like letting them talk, and they just kept talking, and they just keep going for quite a while. I don't know, 5 minutes or so of just like them back and forth about the old days. And before that witch came along, and then they say Baba Yaga at some point, and I just I was just like, whoa, I don't remember any of this. I remember the first time I played it wondering if they were actually supposed to be Thor and Odin.
Yeah.
But anyway, the band, I really like that fight on the band shell, because even though it's lots and lots of guys, it feels very manageable. Or it did this time anyway. The first time I think I had some trouble with it, but I think in general I got a lot better at the combat this time around, where I had a lot fewer stopping points. Couple, but not as many as I remembered.
I think weirdly and uncharacteristically for most games, I feel like they got more generous in the last third of the game when it comes to resources. For me, at least, I always ended a section with more than I needed, and was happy for that, Yeah. And maybe I'm just was getting better at the game, but oftentimes, it gets people, the way that you tune and balance, especially because you don't tend to play the end of the game enough as developers, that usually there isn't enough. But that was good.
Or you're making the end of the game last, and by that time, everybody on the team is really good at the game, and so they no longer recognize that they're too good at the game to.
Yeah, you don't see the difficulty. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was good. That was a good sequence. I mean, as far as like all the sequences go, like the dam stuff, like overall, all the set pieces or locations, if you will. I mean, it wasn't a topic we planned to talk about, but just to reiterate what we talked about in previous episodes, playing 5 and 6, which is just what I played, reinforced even more the whole open world thing for me, because the connectivity of things, and the landmarking, and how stuff's interconnected, especially getting to the dam, like approaching it, seeing it in the distance, and I mean, it's just like I could totally, and then the fact that the lake is where you end up too, and the lake is sort of central. If you look at the map they have on the wall of the area, of their version of Puget Sound, it is sort of like Lake Washington or Lake Union up here in that it's pretty central for Western Washington. And the Cauldron Lake is the same, so it's like I could see in an open world structure context, right, that you end up in the center of the map. And it's kind of, everything is sort of, and I guess narratively, Cauldron Lake is sort of the heart of everything. It sounds, is what you find out too. So yeah, it's such a fascinating story, that was the case. And in a way, if you didn't know it, you probably wouldn't have thought of it. But once you do, it definitely changes the way you look at the game.
Yeah.
And in a way, there definitely are times too when, I mean, it definitely suffers a little bit from, we need to get some hours out of the game, so let's elongate this section with more combat or whatever, something to slow you down, right? And it's sort of, now that I know about the open world thing, it exacerbates the problem of, oh my gosh, I just need to go right over there. Why are you making me go down and then up and then around and then back through? And then, it's like, no, it's just right there. I just need to go right there, because in an open world context, which is probably why they ended up not doing it, because it's like, we don't want them to just be able to beeline it. We need to funnel them, or something, or maybe they just couldn't build the whole thing, or who knows why, but tech,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it feels like the tech is there. It feels like it is, as you point out, kind of a hindrance, because I remember playing it the first time not knowing that and thinking, wow, for a game that's linear, this is really strange. Like, why would you build all this extra off the path stuff, that, and then you got to have these collectibles to kind of force you out there to justify it. And like, it all felt really, really strange. And now, knowing that they had basically built the whole map, more or less, I mean, I'm sure there's stuff that they just cut out because they didn't need to be on the disc or whatever. But, knowing that they effectively had planned to build the whole map, it's like, well, of course, like at that point, well, might as well, we did all this good work, kind of a, sunk cost fallacy in some ways. We should use that, we should get all the mileage out of that we can, and we'll push you out into there. And, and like, see that gas station, you can go there. You just have to go left and then down and up and right and around this, find a log to cross the river. It's a very different approach than the open world games I've worked on, which are more directly, you can go there. It's just that the space is a lot bigger. So getting from here to there, you'll probably find 6 other things you want to do in the meantime, and you'll have forgotten where you were going in the first place.
It's more
which is not a thing in a horror game, right?
Right. Right. It's like, they're often antithetical. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's, it's a weird fit. Maybe they didn't really, I don't really know if they always knew it was going to be as much of a horror as it ended up. Like, maybe they found their way to that as well.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, he in the manuscript, he even writes very openly about the fact that the story turns into a horror story.
Right.
So it's interesting that, I mean, that's one aspect. I definitely appreciated the sort of meta-ness of it, where there's the self-referential stuff, and finding a manuscript page right before something happens that it describes, and then so the foreshadowing is literally in the page,
right.
there's a lot
Actually,
of that.
there's another benefit to that as well, in that, we were talking about the FBI agent who, Nightingale, who barely registers as a character, but as you point out, he's actually a deeper character because of the book. Like in the game, he's a scene. He's a couple scenes when they're chasing through the woods and at the radio station. He is then like the scene where he arrests him, and then he's outside the jail cell, and then he's gone. And he's much more impactful on Alan Wake's life in some ways. And that whole thing with him getting snatched reads much better on the screen because he's been snatched by the dark presence because you read it on the page. But you don't actually see that. It's like it fills in the blank for you of like, he got grabbed and taken out through this door by the dark presence. And you're like, what just happened? I guess there was a sort of shot of it, but it's like, it's very fast. And because you've had the foreshadowing, it's already explained to you, which is really nice. I actually find that Pat Maine, the disc jockey or radio host or whatever, is more of a character to me than the FBI agent.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, because you definitely spend more time with him, even though it's on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just there's not one. I think I can see why this is considered to be a bit of a cult. Has a cult following because there aren't many games that successfully fool with that kind of weird storytelling, like out of sync storytelling. Because also like there's usually a main manuscript plot that you're finding in a level, and then there's like a subplot that is off the beaten path and is lower in the list.
Yeah, appears lower in the list. Yeah.
And so those are definitely way out of sync with what's going on. And my memory of it is like, it really depends on each of the levels about how out of sync or how out of order or whatever. But they give you a lot of extra backstory that you wouldn't have gotten in the game. So it's a really like, I'm just thinking of this now, and we didn't talk about this in the pre-show, but there's an almost too disjointedness for me on, it's the same problem that we've talked about with the sort of, with Clint's, ludonarrative dissonance stuff is just all of the horror and the combat, and then all of the story and the manuscript stuff and all of what's going on with that. They're almost like too different for me, even though the combat's scary and horror, and it presents you with the enemy and the darkness, right? It's the manifestation of the darkness, or what I would like to call the hiss.
Oh boy.
So it fits well for that reason, but I just wanted to get to the story stuff throughout the game, and
it's funny because the manuscript pages follow, like, all the narrative stuff feels pretty well integrated, even though there are parts that you might find like, and I don't think it nails everything by any means, but I think that like they're definitely trying to reflect mechanically things that the story is about, even to the point of like, well, this whole thing that you're enacting is stuff that Alan Wake wrote the week before it all happened.
Yeah.
Right. So you're finding the manuscript pages before the events happen to you, but also the whole story of the game is happening as a result of something that happened. I mean, not the whole thing, because there's when they show up, but there's that interstitial week which sets up the rest of it. And so it's like, they're like you said, they're layering those things. It's like, well, on this level, you're playing the story that happened before, and mechanically you're finding the pages of things that haven't happened yet, as well, which then of course ties into, like I said, the actual presentation of those moments. And like each of those, I think, enriches the other, to some degree. So I appreciate what they're attempting. It's a high wire act, and I think that they definitely, fall into the net now and again. My metaphor is a little strained here, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I appreciate it too. It reminds me of, now that we're talking about it, reminds me sort of time travel stories, in a way,
right.
Especially like the movie Primer, if you know what I mean, where there's very much like, I mean, that Primer is, I think, a successful version of this, but like a very successful version of, okay, here's the flow chart all happening in a linear movie. It's like, here's all the different layers, and this is kind of even though it's not about time travel, it is kind of, because you're reading ahead of time, and he wrote the story in the past, and now you're living it. And I love the layered aspect of like, okay, am I him right now, or am I playing out what he wrote? And then there's even that moment of mirroring him where he sees himself. Creepy Alan Wake is looking at him, and it's sort of like, what I forget. There was some dialogue there that I missed, so I don't really know what the significance of that was, but I just like all of the sort of order.
Oh,
like,
that's totally a nod to Twin Peaks and Dale Cooper.
Is it that on the nose? Like,
absolutely.
Does it have any role to play though in the
not in this game, because he shows up in American Nightmare, I think. He's talked about a lot, I think, in American Nightmare.
The double?
Mr. Scratch, yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, but I mean, but in the fiction of, and the sort of lore, I guess you could say, of the lake and manifestation of art and the darkness presence and all of that stuff, what does the double represent? Is it literally just an homage for no good reason, or you know what I mean? Like,
well, no, I mean, I think it's supposed to mean, in some ways, now I'm kind of like trying to read into the text a little bit more, but I think it's supposed to mean in some ways like the darkness that you need to go into, for certain types of creativity, I guess, like that there's this dark, Jungian undercurrent in all of us that we're tapping into when we tell the horror stories or thriller stories or whatever. There's just this dark unconscious, that is primal, right? That is pre-intellectual, and that's sort of where that comes from. And it's sort of like I guess you'd say the id, right? If you're, I guess, a Freudian at that point. So it's like I guess in Jung it would be the animus, and in Freud it would be the id, but
yeah, all those great philosophers and psychologists and all their great.
Yeah, I'm not saying, I'm not saying they were.
I know you're not.
I'm not commenting on the validity of any individual psychoanalytical theory. I'm just saying, like, that there's a, even some modern, psychologists will talk about, the like the mythological gods are not important. The classical gods, pantheons, were not important because of, sort of any reality we can assign to them, but more like that they reflected aspects of human nature that were primal, in the same way, or sometimes were primal in the same way. Like Dionysus, right, is just like this unrestrained, et cetera. So like, there's that too, right? I mean, I think that's like maybe kind of what it's gesturing at, is like that there's
like the seven deadly sins kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That the story is just something that comes from so deep we can't even really intellectualize it, and so it's alien, right? And
no, I can get there too. I think the reason that I'm frustrated by it though is that like it was a little bit thrown in at the end, kind of thing.
Yeah,
like if that was really a conceit that they really were wanting to have be meaningful. Then we probably should have seen his double a few times throughout the game.
Yeah,
and
I think Mr. Scratch is mentioned before that, but I don't think it's. I think it's subtle. I think it's way too subtle. Yeah, and I only noticed it because when I saw it, I was like, "Oh, that's right." There's that Mr. Scratch thing. I guess this is where that shows up because it's also in this sort of second game. So
and you played that, so you have that kind of like reverse.
Yeah, but I'm sure the first time I also got to the end and went, well, that's just Twin Peaks. Right? Is probably what I said.
So much like the owl and then the light lady instead of the log lady.
Yeah, the lamp lady.
The lamp lady, the lantern lady. I think like going back to the layered aspect of it in sort of the time travel story metaphor, like I really loved all that stuff about the game. And it wasn't, we were talking about this in pre-show. It isn't that I need to, especially in the first playthrough, that I need to be able to map it all out perfectly. Because, they clearly wanted things to be left up to interpretation and vague in some ways, or for mysterious for you to fill in the blanks of like, what do you think happened? Who exactly, like, maybe it's Baba Yaga, but what is the darkness? Maybe it's all sort of in a Hellboy kind of way. It's all evil myths are kind of the same, and ironically, Baba Yaga is one of the best Hellboy stories is relating around Baba Yaga.
Okay. I don't know that.
Yeah, and in fact, it's actually many. There's Baba Yaga is basically like his nemesis for quite a long time.
Oh,
maybe
okay.
she might even be the one that kills him. I'm forgetting. Spoiler, but Anyway,
I basically have seen the movies and like read one collection, so that's
the comic's so good. Yeah, and it goes places. So I recommend it, especially if you like stories inspired by folk tales, as you probably know. Like that's their whole bread and butter. But anyway, so I like all that stuff, and I don't need it to make sense on the first go. And I like the mystery and the vagueness and the sort of, I want to be able to like the red thread, like what do I think the red thread board looks like? But for me, it was a little too either, or actually both, probably. One, hard to parse as I'm playing on the fly. Like I kind of need to play it a second time, I think, to really get where I wanted to get to. And then even on the stuff I got, it was a little too vague.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, I think I know what you're doing there.
You want to be in my position, right? I mean, it's basically.
I do.
Yeah.
I think you grokked it this time. Well, I mean, maybe you did the first time too.
No, I don't think I did the first time.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, some of it I got. Well, I didn't get the Baba Yaga. I didn't get what was. I mean, I got most of like the writer and Thomas Zane and the parallels there, and like what happened to Thomas Zane, and like I kind of got all of that stuff. But what I didn't get was some of the other stuff we've been talking about.
There's another layer or two or three in there that you won't get on the first playthrough, which is a testament to it, I think, especially of the era of the game. They have the nightmare difficulty and stuff like that. And it's not in the grand scheme, it's not a super long game. So I could see them really trying to encourage people to, let's not give them all the answers. Maybe they'll want to play again, or maybe some of the, maybe the nightmare difficulty manuscript pages have a lot of answers.
A lot more explanation.
And
I don't know. I would have to look them up because
that would be kind of cool.
Yeah.
The irony of that, though, is that the player persona for that is probably not the same person.
Right.
The person who's going to play Nightmare likes the combat.
Yeah.
And the person that doesn't play Nightmare wants the story. So that's an interesting, I just thought of that now. That's an interesting sort of like tension where it's like, don't put that stuff behind that wall because you're not catering to the same player types. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, that whole furor at BioWare about wanting to have a difficulty that was like skippable combat, because there was an era of, games where you could just sort of like skip, and I don't know if you can do that in this game. I mean, you certainly skip the cutscenes if you want, I think. But, skipping line by line, I mean, adventure games had that. I mean, it's mostly for replay because you presumably want to see those. Most of what an adventure game had, that and puzzles. So you wouldn't want to skip it, but maybe if you're trying to go back through it, and get to your favorite bits or whatever, you might want to skip hit the space bar and get through lines. This is something where you almost want to finish the game and open up an easier mode where all the story is revealed.
Yeah, right.
Like where you just have an infinite flashlight that's like a spotlight. It's just super bright, and you just like things show up and they just kind of wisp away.
Yeah, they should. Yeah, that's a good point. Nightmare. I mean, it was also of the era, right? It's like harder difficulty was what you do, but we are a bit more in the era now where I think that, definitely, Baldur's Gate 3 has
We're only 14 years ago, though, so it's not.
Yeah, that's true. But
really that long ago.
It isn't, but also,
but it feels like it is. It's and they of course started it 5 years or 6 years before that. Besides, so.
Yeah. But it does feel like a game. I don't know if I can justify buying Alan Wake 2 for full price, but I really do want to play it. But I'm really interested to see what the modern version of this game is, especially after Control, because I'm betting that they handle this stuff a lot better. They've probably come along. We know they've come a long way, and when you have like Alan Wake, probably Quantum Break to some degree, and Control under your belt to make a sequel to this game, like I know that Alan Wake 2, was quite a journey, because I think at a time there was an era there where they basically said they weren't sure they were going to do a sequel.
Yeah.
And then I think Epic, when they came in to do the publishing deal, helped unearth it, which was great. But in a way, I'm happy that they put it on a shelf for so long, because now they get to, so many years later, do a really modern version, and they've learned so much. If they had done, for instance, a sequel follow up to this right after this one, it would have been maybe more of the same,
probably more of the same. Yeah, I mean, they would have learned some stuff, but the fundamentals, fundamentally, I mean, to some of the things, of course, in Control feels a lot better, plays a lot better. They've learned some things about, like, okay, yeah, but your character still has to be, competent. Maybe we'll kind of use this as a way to go to the 3 C's topic, but I mean, I even feel it a little bit. I started Quantum Break just out of curiosity. I didn't get very far. I still have PC Game Pass, so there's things that are just available, and I'll check them out. But I don't have a lot of bandwidth for it. But anyway, it was certainly interesting. I already felt. I just heard a voice in my house, and I think it was Siri. It picked up my voice or something.
Oh, that was like a real thing. Okay.
Yeah, I just was very distracted for a moment. Like, what is that voice in my house?
In the house.
They're in the house. But anyway, I mean, I think that, yes, I agree. They're learning a lot more and learning about how to deliver their story. This one feels so cutscene heavy to me in comparison with Control, which does have cutscenes, but they're not. Mm-hmm. There's not as many, and they don't feel as long. Some of these feel really long to me, So,
well, and I think that's the thing we were talking about the 2 different game problem, the ludonarrative dissonance stuff of they have a story they want to tell. Clearly, it's about a writer, so they're going to put a lot of cutscenes in. They're going to force feed you the story. But, oh, by the way, we need it to be 20 hours and we want combat, Right. And so, the other constant example are the Naughty Dog games, right? Especially the Uncharted games. It's you're in combat and you're in puzzles and you're in story, and, it's but weaving those together is challenging for sure. So it feels seamless. And though I think Last of Us, I think they nailed it on that. But again, the conceit is closer to what you're doing from a gameplay perspective, so it fits better because you're surviving, and the
you're not a writer
surviving. Yeah. So
you're not spending all your time in your head. You're spending all your time worrying about your body.
Yeah, which is a good segue to the 3 C's, because, you are not a fighter. You are a writer.
You've even got elbow patches.
Yeah, it's just, and there maybe we don't know this for sure. Maybe we're giving them too much credit, but let's assume that it's true. They probably were trying to make a character feel and play like the character was represented in the game. Is this fish out of water writer who's never held a gun.
He's a city guy,
right? Like all this kind of stuff. And so they're going to tune and balance him that way. But it's just, if you're going to have combat in the game, the for better or for worse, the fantasy fulfillment around that is having fulfilling systemic and mechanical combat, and for me, because they leaned into the physics aspect of the character. He's very mushy, very like imprecise. I started fooling around with the camera some and like really like dissecting it. And when you spin the camera around with the stick and you stop, you take your finger off the stick, the camera continues forward for a little bit. Like it's very swimmy.
Yeah.
And I think it works aesthetically. I think that all works well for what they're trying to do, but it doesn't feel good, because he's very imprecise because of the physics stuff, and the camera's very swimmy, and then like controlling like over the shoulder stuff too. Like I tend to prefer camera over my right shoulder in games like this, but they constantly don't let you do that. So it's like they just decide for you, sort of, or it's mostly on the left shoulder, over the left shoulder. So yeah, I mean,
and they're also pulling back and they're a little higher, I think, than normally that kind of camera would be. Like it's not a Gears of War style tight in, fills the bottom left quadrant of the screen if you're over the right shoulder, which is kind of how a game like that feels. And here, I think they deliberately want to make him feel smaller. So they show him from like, I don't know, mid torso up, and he's very tiny in the screen, relatively speaking. I think partly that's to try to give more situational awareness, but it still doesn't, as we talked about before, it still doesn't nail that. What I will say is that I got so much better, and I think the 5.1, honestly, the surround really, really helped. I mean,
that's good to hear.
Intensify the horror, but I also think that it helped me get way better at the combat. Like I knew, the dude who's throwing a thing at me threw it at me from over my left shoulder. I need to dodge to the right. I mean, the end of this game, really these last 3 chapters were basically a cakewalk for me. Like there's one area I can remember. There's a tunnel in the final chapter where it's all blocked and like you have to go in and there's like a fight right in the middle of the tunnel. And I remember it because you have to do the beginning, the outside the tunnel part as well, because that's where the checkpoint is. So there's like basically two fights. And that was like the one place I can look at and say, yeah, I got stuck. I had to do that like 3 times, but that was it, and it was because in that space I had nowhere to maneuver. And so I had to actually just rethink how I was going to fight them, like where I should go. And of course, knowing their patterns, how they're going to appear would help at that point. So it's a little learning. It's kind of like a learning through death, which I think is a no generally. But ever since the, basically attack on the bandstand, I felt very in control of the combat. Even though I didn't feel entirely in control of the character, I did feel like I was not often in real danger, and the fear just came from the fact that I'm easily manipulable by audio. Yeah,
no, that's good to hear that the audio did come into play so much for you, because that's a good, that's an aspiration I think we all should have for sure. Yeah, it's interesting coming off. I mean, I think we talked about this already, but it's interesting coming off of. I mean, I didn't go back and play Max Payne 2 or anything like that, of course, so I don't have I didn't play Max Payne 2. I only played 1, and I only have the vague memory, and it's a very different game, but it's interesting coming off of a game like that where they've essentially switched, even though that was third person as well, it's essentially a shooter. And they've essentially changed genres quite heavily for this game. And so I kind of would then say probably we can make the assumption that they really intentionally built the character this way, the 3Cs this way on purpose.
Yeah.
And so I really applaud them for committing to that. But I just think that,
it was a failed experiment.
There's still ways to achieve the goal that they're trying to get to, because it does partner well with the aesthetic of the situation, the circumstance, because of the fish out of water thing. But there's still ways that you can still have it be gratifying and not frustrating and still achieve that aesthetic goal.
I mean, we've referred to
through animation style or whatever, like different things you can do to make him feel like a bumbling, but still, and actually I do think Uncharted is a good example of that. Like he's always been seen as kind of the everyman, so to speak, and he's not like a military specialist, but through voice lines and animations and like quips and all this kind of stuff, you feel that Nathan is kind of like, yeah, I mean, he can handle a gun, but he doesn't want to be there. He's scared, he's like, but
yeah,
and you're still laying waste, so that's where the dissonance comes in. But so there's still ways, but
yeah, no, I would liken it, even though it's a first person camera. I think that RE7 and 8, as we talked about last time, is a better execution. Again, first person. But I still feel like, a knucklehead, like a guy who's way out of his element, in those games. Even against a smaller number of enemies, right? It's usually not large numbers of enemies that you're fighting. I'm thinking of like the boss battles, particularly like fighting those 3 sisters who are the shadows and stuff like that. You feel really like really on the edge of your seat, and yet you can do what you want to do.
It felt good. That's it plays well. Yeah, but you're
terrified. You're also just like, oh my god,
reactions
so
it's interesting.
Happening?
It's an interesting, as sort of like I don't know if this is going to be one of my takeaways, but as an early takeaway, it's an interesting thing, because I'm not saying I know I have all the answers or anything, but it's an interesting thing for me to internalize about doing the best you can to make sure that you can achieve both of those goals at the same time,
right.
and not kind of be, having one be beholden to the other. You still need to achieve good 3Cs, but you might have a character who doesn't logically make sense. That they're as skillful as the player wants to be, but there are ways to do it.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree. I think you need to do it a lot through the character as voiced, unless, that's the sort of Nathan Drake example, how the character reacts emotionally and, by voice line to what's happening, and not so much with the player's experience of that mechanically. Because as a player, you want to feel like you can do the thing. Because there's nothing more frustrating than being in a game being like, I just want to do this. Why is it so hard to just do this? This thing I want to do that you have put in front of me to do. Why is that so hard? So I get it. I did appreciate in these final segments, the different ways that they kind of bend some of their mechanics to abstraction, and also to that weird tornado. That tornado is super strange. The words, though, where you're kind of firing the beam at the words, and at the end you don't have to. You can just pick the ones that you want. You don't have to do them all. I think that's good. When you go to the clicker, that's kind of the tutorial for like, well, here's your chance to figure out what you're supposed to do, because you can't touch it unless you shine the light on it. You take damage. I thought that was kind of cool, and of course, since he lives by his words, it's trying to tie those themes together. The character with the sort of mechanics in ways that maybe it hasn't until then.
Yeah, I thought that sequence was great. I wasn't sure. I was really interested to see how they were going to get you to the cabin when in real time, in the current day, the cabin doesn't exist,
Yeah. Well, and how did it exist the week before? That's still a little unclear.
Yeah. See, that's the kind of stuff where I'm like, how do I parse that? It was really unexpected, clever. It reinforced the writer theme and all that. The phones, picking up the phones if you revealed them, and there were a lot of fun moments, and then having other words, the black words that were kind of representing other characters that, kind of floating through, floating above. You don't shine light on them, but they're floating above. And it was really interesting and different and unlike, just like Control, like very just like, unsuspecting, like you just don't see it coming. And they were really good at doing that as a studio. It's being very creative and clever and surprising to the player. And I think it's more successful. Like, that's a trope they could have used throughout the game, but it's way more successful that it was a surprise at the end, because they had that sort of like vacuum of space, shadow world, whatever that was.
Right.
So they could kind of do whatever they wanted.
The ocean, as it were.
Yeah, I guess so. So what, right before you go in there, oh yeah, that's when he jumps in the water.
Yeah, he's jumped into
into the water. And
to get back to the diving. He's basically in the diving bell in some ways. That's what I think because I think the house has, I feel like when you pull away from it, you get this sense that he's trapped in the same way Thomas Zane was trapped.
The island's called Divers
Lake?
Divers Lake?
Divers Island. Yes, Divers Island.
Yeah.
Cauldron Lake.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's called Divers Isle.
Oh, Cauldron.
Yeah.
Baba Yaga.
Yep. It's all there, it's all tied
Yeah,
together.
maybe it's a little, maybe it's a little too there. Maybe I was not looking.
You're trying to look away from the darkness, Tim.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say that because I think it should be said, I think women characters in the story were not, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
they were either villains or crazy, or the MacGuffin, or what have you. And yeah, I mean, it was a little bit too much of that for my taste. The sheriff was the only one that, that stood out, but
yeah, she stands out. I mean, I think that the lamp lady, once you learn what she's been doing, she's actually way more sympathetic than the log lady ever was to me. They don't make as much fun of her as they kind of made fun of the log lady in Twin Peaks, right? She was there and just being weird. And you're like, what is with this lady? And the lamp lady kind of only has one real scene at the beginning, where you meet her in the diner, and then you kind of don't see her again until she's at the power plant. And it's like, wait a minute, she's been preparing for 30 years, to give you this clicker.
Yeah.
It's that's kind of, I mean, it's sad. And yes, I would agree, she's been driven a little crazy by it. And like, they definitely play on that a little bit. Like she's been staring in the lights too long.
Caressing a lamp,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agree.
It's log lady like, but yeah. But I mean, I do like that she was the one that put all the caches there, right? And they explain that, and it's nice that's a reveal I didn't
and she put the symbol coming. And everything. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Good. And where the symbol comes from, and and all that stuff. So that was all well thought through. Yeah, but I just I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like it's and it's compounded by the fact that I don't like Alan Wake.
Yeah.
Or really, I mean, Barry's the bumbling friend, but they're really, I don't know. It's hard when you don't have any characters in something like this that you actually like.
Yeah,
it's harder because so the fiction ended up being the thing that did pull me through, right? Because I just kind of wanted to unravel the mystery.
Yeah,
but it's I think in I definitely had more interest in. I'm unfortunately blanking on her name in Control, but
I don't remember either.
The main character,
yeah,
and her brother, and I thought she was performed well and a likable character. So
really, really compelling. She's not talking about herself in the third person all the time in the narration, which I think is another bit of distancing that makes Wake unlikable, because if we always
be him,
I mean, you're not allowed to get close to him, because he's always saying Wake did this and Wake did that, and he will, while you're controlling him, I guess he will say, I knew that such and such and such, but because it's his internal thought, like it's distancing in a way, whereas in Control, and I feel like her name is like Jessie or something. I don't know. But in Control, when you're hearing her thoughts, it's more what she's feeling and concerned about, and not what she knows. Like he's an authority in a way about like, I knew that I had to get to the blah, blah, I knew, he's always saying, I know this, I know that, like, I realized that what I was, writing was a horror story and not a thriller, and, just et cetera, et cetera.
He's making the revelations for you.
Yeah.
You're not writing the story. He's writing the story. But in Control, there's much more of a, you line up much more with her discovery of what's happening, right? Like you're there when she gets the job, you're finding you're unraveling everything with her. She doesn't know what's going on, and you don't know what's going on. So the dramatic irony there is the same as with her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
no, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, the framing is that much better. I mean, it all makes sense in the case of Alan Wake. It just makes him unlikable, right? I mean, he knows all these things because he already wrote it, and it's kind of in his subconscious now because he's bumped his head or whatever. So it's kind of coming out, but he's kind of discovering what he already knows. So it makes sense he's that way. It just makes him a little bit tough to take at times.
Yeah.
So
that's why I'm so interested to see what the sequel does have to offer, because it's like, where do you go? I mean, I guess we're gonna play the play the two DLCs, episodes. Right?
Yes, yeah. We're gonna do that for next week.
Well, yeah, I'm also really interested to see what those even are. Like, why would you do DLC after this? The way this ends, I'm really, really intrigued to see what that is.
Yeah, I actually think they're pretty strong, and we'll talk about it next week. But I think they're playing around with what their engine can do, and like untying themselves from reality in some ways. You'll certainly see, that some of the things I like at the end with the abstractions and this gigantic swirling tornado and stuff like that is stuff that they're going to delve more into the.
Oh, okay.
So I won't say more than that, but I do think it's them sort of saying, okay, phew, we don't have to be grounded in this world we built, this like Pacific Northwest, exactly whatever. Like we can do some really weird stuff now. I think that's fun.
Got it.
I feel like the first one explores the story more, and the second one explores kind of that weirdness more. That's my recollection, but we'll get there. So I don't remember how long they are, so apologies in advance if they're super long. But I mean, it's two, like we've been doing it two episodes at a time, so it's about the same amount of stuff.
Yeah. Does America?
In the just for if people are playing along, you go to the episodes off the main menu, and they're listed under there. You can't like continue your game into the DLC. You have to like specifically load.
They're just called specials. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is another the TV metaphor continues.
Right.
Luckily, you can play them on. You decide the difficulty. So I think, to be honest, I think I'm just going to play easy.
I might as well for speed reasons.
I got the understanding of combat on normal difficulty, and I don't know if I need more of it. But
yeah.
Does American Nightmare have any pieces of the story that that are useful to know? Like, if I don't play that, will I be missing something important?
No, I don't think so.
Its own weird thing.
It's its own weird thing. I mean, it's mostly, and I think the things I mentioned, like that location, that motel that's in Control, I think that's actually in American Nightmare.
That seems important.
Well, it's not though. It's just a location that it feels like they're tying it in, but it's not. Like, you don't spend any real time in the interior of those rooms in American Nightmare, but I think it might be the location that I was thinking about. I'm not even sure. So, like, at this point, I'm like, well, maybe those are connected. I think it was more of a formal exploration, like how to stretch more out of a kind of a small budget. I don't think narrative-wise, really, there's anything there other than now I'm chasing after Mr. Scratch because maybe he'll tell me where Alice went. I think that's basically the story. and it's not satisfyingly resolved because, as we know, Alan Wake 2, he's still looking for his wife. Yeah. So, it's, I really don't think it's necessary. So I know you like to play all the things, but
yeah, it's just that nagging feeling that there's this one puzzle piece that was the thing that puts this one thing together,
I think this is just a different small puzzle.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Well, let's we're gonna do our takeaways next week when we turn to the DLC. I don't think we'll spend tons and tons of time on the DLC, but I think there'll be some interesting things to remark on. But for now, let's quickly get to a couple of emails and wrap this up. We have two. You have one from our friend Maas. These were sent to devgameclub@gmail.com.
Okay. Okay. The subject is why a thermos? Why a thermos? From Maas Neotek. Hello, Maas. Hey, Tim and Brett. So I'm playing Alan Wake, and I'm in Rose's trailer, and there's a picture of a killer whale on the wall. All I could think was, why? Then, as I'm running around and collecting all these thermoses, I again ask myself, why? Not why, as in why are there collectibles? That part I get, but why did the team decide on a thermos? It could have been a giant adult toy.
I replaced the specifics there because we like people to be able to listen with their kids. I don't want people's kids to be asking, what is a?
It could be a giant one of those, and I'd still run around picking them up. I get the coffee theme in the game, but whatever. I'm not asking you to guess as to why the team made that particular choice. What it made me think about, and what it did make me want to know about, was what is the single dumbest choice made in one of your games that got an inordinate amount of time or discussion? One of those, why are we even fighting about this kind of moments where you realize a simple thing has taken up so much time that you feel embarrassed because it is so unimportant compared to other things that clearly deserved more attention. Love, Maas. Well, that's not where I thought this email was going, but good work.
Well, I will say you didn't ask for it, but I'll give it. I have a theory behind the thermoses. My theory is this: he had a week where he wrote a whole novel, and to stay up all that time, he needed something to keep him going. And so in the story that he wrote, which is, of course, the game that we're playing, he put thermoses everywhere of coffee to keep him going. That is my theory. That is literally just like Alan, the writer, in the week that he's forgotten, was fueled by coffee to write a whole novel, almost a whole novel, because, of course, he's got to finish it, in 7 days with Baba Yaga standing over his shoulder. Is like, that's how he got through, as he was drinking coffee the whole time. Okay, so there's my theory. Yeah. What stupid things have we spent too much time talking about? I have one. I wouldn't say it's a stupid thing we argued about, but I have one small anecdote I can think of. Not in a game that you and I worked on together, so it's a different game.
Yeah. Well, let me think about it. Why don't you go first? Because I need to think about it a little bit. Then.
So I can remember we had, for Skyrim, we had a team meeting where... So Adam Adamowicz was the main concept artist for Skyrim, and was the only concept artist for Fallout 3. And he and the other concept artist that was working on Skyrim had a week where they just concepted different meats, food. And I remember there was a, and we heard about this kind of, I don't think in the moment, but there was a point later, and I'll come back to why this is kind of important to games. But there's a point later where Todd was describing how he went in there, and they're like, instead of drawing like giants and dragons and armor and I don't know, one of the other million things that are in that game that are mechanically important, they're drawing all these different kinds of meat. And Todd was like, what are you doing? And Adam was like, well, this week it's all about meat. We're just doing meat. And it was one of those things where you're like, yeah, I could see there being an argument there. And the point I want to come back around to was that this was a point where Todd at the time kind of shook his head and, okay, you're the genius, Adam. You go, draw what you're going to draw. And it ended up giving, no pun intended, some real flavor to the world to have the foodstuffs in it, because those are things you can pick up, and they're in your inventory and things like that. And they're just like these, most things are hard objects, helmets and swords and things. And then there's like pieces of organic material, meat that's in your inventory, and it's just a reflection of like the team makes the game. We didn't know that meat was important until Adam decided the game needed meat, and it made the game more a reflection of Adam and his contributions to it. So Adam passed away, I think, at the beginning of Fallout 4, or maybe as we were finishing Skyrim. I can't remember the date, but he was a great artist. And I mean, it's you can see his art collected today. If you go up to the Bethesda site, there's the whole thing with just a sort of a site just about his artwork. So, but yeah, it was one of those things where they spent a lot of time drawing meat. It was like nobody would look at that game and say, how much time would you really realistically spend on that? And for that game, it was quite a lot.
It's interesting that, and that's a great story and a great memory. It's interesting that Maas is bringing this up in context of the thermoses, because I bet that wasn't even much of a discussion. They probably just chose thermoses, and they're like, okay, we're doing thermoses.
I think it was part of the deep back lore, Tim. You have to understand the thermoses.
No, I agree with you. No, I think it probably was too. I think there actually probably is a motivation that fits really well with what's going on. It's obviously very Twin Peaks, but I think it probably was an easy and not very discussed decision. You know what I mean? It's like, it's, of course, thermoses. How about thermoses? Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay, good. Next thing. There wasn't as he put it, the embarrassed about how much time he spent on something. So mine, the only one that I can come up with that I'm willing to talk about, but even this is, I don't think we have too many like hardcore Halo listeners, but maybe we do. And I'm getting myself into hot water to some degree by saying that I think we spent too much time talking about it. But and I'll try to do the short version of this, between Halo 4 and 5, there's this thing in Halo called descoping. And that's where I'll start. And that's where any Halo fan is already yelling.
Okay. And whereas I'm like, don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Most people won't know. Probably most people won't know what I'm talking about. But it's really important in PvP Halo. And that is just to explain it simply, it's if I am scoped in, specifically obviously with the sniper rifle or something like that, and somebody shoots me while I'm scoped in, then I would descope. I would go out of my scope, and I would no longer have the advantage of the scope and the distance and stuff, right? So in Halo 4, they took that out. So that was pre-me. And then Halo 5 comes in, we actually had we hired people from the pro community to come in and work with us on the development of the game. Did the same thing on Halo Infinite. And that was, they were able to help represent the nuance of the game, because Halo is very nuanced from a combat perspective, of course. And so on Halo 5, which, I want to be a good listener, and I want to work with the folks, and I want to understand the importance of descoping. And we did bring it back, and we put it in. And I ended up being convinced by them and by others that it was a good thing to bring back, even though, as I described it, you might think it to be frustrating, right? Because I'm in a scope and then I get knocked out of it because somebody shot me. But it's actually a balancing mechanic, because somebody's aimed at you and they have a bead on you, and they're just really good with the sniper rifle, and you just can't get you can't get a foothold. So you have no options, but you could shoot at them and then descope them. So it was a balancing thing. Totally got it. They convinced me. But man, did we talk about that for just like hours and days. And I mean, and it's just like, because there's always camps, right? There's camps on the team. They're like, no, this isn't user friendly enough, or what, I mean, you can imagine all the debates. But the hardcore, like, no, you don't understand in Halo 3 and blah, blah, blah. It's like, this is in there, it's really important. And I was ultimately, I became convinced, but we just spent too much time. I mean, it's embarrassing, like how, and, to be honest, some of that is on me and others, leaders, where we just like, we should just made the call and moved on. But it's just like, there's always debates and too much, it's like, in a way we should have just trusted what was there and, and not tried to overthink it and just do, Bungie had cracked that nut already. So why did we need to? So, yeah.
Yeah. Why weren't you moving the reload time from 1.7 seconds instead to 1.9?
Because Jamie said not to.
Right. Of course. Well, yeah, but he had descoping, Tim. I mean,
yeah. Yeah. But that's what, I mean, like that's the new appreciation. Cause, I was definitely a Halo fan. And one of the reasons I wanted to work at 343 was because I love Halo's gameplay. We talked about this when we did.
Yeah.
When we did Halo.
And when we talked with Jamie.
But I mean, it's like, I had no idea one thing I was ill-equipped for, and I think most people coming in working on Halo are going to be ill-equipped for, to be honest, unless you are a pro player before you start, before you join. The pros, man, like, it's just a different game to them.
Yeah.
In a good way, largely, but it's a really hard balancing act, right? Because you're trying to make a game for not just them. Right. And so it's really tricky. Yeah. And I learned so much, but I definitely I'd grown a new appreciation for the nonsense that they get up to.
Yeah. I would say too that, you're there in a later part in your career when there's more social media, there's more focus and visibility just on, the fact of it going on. It's been around for a while. Whereas like in their Star Wars days, sure, huge fan base, but getting in touch with us, like knowing anything about us was a lot trickier, because there wasn't, there wasn't even Facebook. There's really there's no real way to know, like who to be angry at. So unless we went and read forums, which if you're a developer, healthy not to, we just wouldn't know, and we'd have and it would be after the game was done anyway. And then of course with Tomb Raider, you're rebooting something at that point, that had not had a fresh look. We talked about that recently about, freshening up something and going in a new direction. We talked about it, I think, in connection with Batman, so you're trying literally to find a new audience, for it, and it's a little different. So I don't know. A lot of you're really in the scope there with Halo, as it were. All right, I have one more here that's pretty short. It's just a question or a thought, but I thought I'd put it out there in the interest of transparency and completeness. It is DGC listenership by Luke Theriault. This is in reference to our discussion last week about where I mentioned how our numbers are trailing down. I haven't investigated this yet, but he offers a theory. He says, "Hey, Brett, I can't speak to DGC's listenership as a whole, but I know that I went from downloading episodes from the DGC website to streaming them on Spotify when that became a possibility. Perhaps your listener base has simply become more diffuse, quote unquote, as more listening options have become available. Regardless, I'm very glad to be one of those in the know. Best regards, Luke Theriault." Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I haven't dug into where our listeners are and how they get to the game, the podcast, the MP3s, but that could be it. I don't know. I'd have to go and try to puzzle that out and see if that's even available to me in the back end of our actual content host.
Wouldn't Libsyn collect it all though?
I would think it would, but I don't know if any of the services cache the audio. Yeah. I don't know if Spotify caches things like that. I mean, I wouldn't think they would for something as small as us. I would think they might for things that are really huge just to have them ready to go. Like 1989 Taylor's version, I'm sure they've got their own copy of, because it gets billions of plays and they want it ready, and they don't want to have to get it from somewhere else. I'm not sure that the same would be
Good
true
reference,
of us.
by the way.
No, thank you.
That's very timely. I'm really actually quite surprised that was your example. I mean, we listen to it every day, so it's.
I've never heard it. I just saw it in my
there
Google
we
News.
Go. That's what I was assuming.
Google Newsfeed mentioned that she had outsold her original version with the Taylor's version, and so there it was. Tip of my tongue. Anything else I would have come up with? Well, probably would not have been so popular. So anyway, thanks for sending those along to devgameclub@gmail.com. We also have a website, www.devgameclub.com. I put those 3 W's in there for you, Tim. We are playing an older game.
https:// Yeah,
they're forward slashes.
Forward slashes.
Jeez, God, too much DOS in your history. You can also find me, I guess, technically on Twitter at DevGameClub. You can find Tim occasionally streaming at twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end. And remember.
Yep. Who am I? We have a fan-run Discord. There's a link in the show notes. It's fun to hang out there. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers, and our logo, that Discord, our merch store, all by Mark Garcia. Have fun replacing light bulbs 24, 67, and 188 this week. And good night.
Good night.